Hello brothers and welcome to Sigma Grandpa channel. The easiest man to fool is the man who is desperate to believe he is different. There is a strange thing happening in the world of the so-called Sigma male. The label has become so popular that almost anyone can wear it. Be quiet for 5 minutes, avoid people, post a black and white picture with a mysterious caption, and suddenly, congratulations, you're apparently a Sigma. But real independence is far less theatrical. In fact, one of the most revealing facts about human behavior is that people often become more concerned with appearing independent than actually becoming independent. And that is exactly where the wannabes begin to separate themselves from the real thing. Because a genuine Sigma male doesn't spend his life trying to convince everyone that he's mysterious, untouchable, emotionally cold, or built different. He doesn't need an audience for his self-control. He doesn't turn every disagreement into a declaration of war. And strangely enough, some of the strongest signs of genuine independence can look almost boring from the outside. That's what makes them so easy to miss. The real test isn't whether a man can walk alone. Plenty of people can do that. The real question is what happens inside him when nobody is watching, nobody is applauding, and nobody is impressed. Can he admit he was wrong? Can he receive attention without becoming addicted to it? Can he change his mind without feeling humiliated? Can he be ordinary without desperately needing to feel exceptional? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, can he stop being obsessed with proving that he's a Sigma? Because some men are building a life, while others are building a character. And once you understand the subtle differences, you may start noticing something fascinating. The loudest Sigma in the room may actually be the least independent person there. So forget the recycled internet stereotypes for a moment. Forget the cold stares, calculated silence, dramatic walkaways, and endless "I don't need anyone" speeches. We're going much deeper. Here are 12 subtle traits that separate a real Sigma male from someone simply playing the part. Number 1, he doesn't need his absence to become a performance. There is a huge difference between leaving quietly and leaving theatrically. A wannabe disappears because he wants people to notice that he disappeared. He stops replying, posts mysterious quotes, becomes suddenly unavailable, and secretly checks who noticed. His silence isn't really silence, it's a billboard. A genuinely self-directed man doesn't operate like that. When he needs space, he takes it. When a relationship no longer makes sense, he can walk away. When a conversation becomes pointless, he doesn't need to slam the door emotionally just to make his exit memorable. He simply redirects his attention. That subtle difference reveals something powerful. He isn't using absence to control people's reactions. He doesn't need someone wondering, why hasn't he texted? He doesn't need mutual friends reporting that he's doing fine. He doesn't need to return 3 weeks later looking mysteriously upgraded just to make somebody regret losing him. And here's the brutal part. If nobody notices his absence, he's still perfectly comfortable. That's real independence. Because the moment your disappearance requires an audience, you're not really detached from people. You're still emotionally attached to their reaction. The genuine Sigma doesn't disappear to become unforgettable. He leaves because staying no longer serves a purpose. Number 2, he can be ordinary without feeling small. One of the strangest signs of genuine confidence is the ability to be completely ordinary without feeling embarrassed by it. A wannabe Sigma needs his life to look exceptional. He wants unusual routines, unusual opinions, unusual clothes, unusual stories, anything that separates him from everyone else. He treats being different like a full-time job. If nobody notices how different he is, something feels wrong. A genuinely self-directed man doesn't have that problem. He can have an average day, do boring work, eat simple food, stay home, and handle ordinary responsibilities without feeling like his identity has been downgraded. He doesn't need every moment to prove that he's special. That's because his sense of worth isn't rented from other people's reactions. He understands something many people never learn. Being ordinary at something doesn't make you an ordinary person. You can be unknown and still be capable. You can live quietly and still have enormous ambitions. You can have no impressive story to tell today and still be building something meaningful for tomorrow. The wannabe wants to look extraordinary immediately. The real man is comfortable being unimpressive while he develops, and that patience is rare. He doesn't need to decorate his personality with mystery, arrogance, or constant displays of superiority. He knows who he is even when absolutely nothing about his day looks remarkable. He doesn't need to look exceptional because he isn't afraid of being unseen. Number 3, he doesn't automatically disagree with the crowd. One of the easiest ways to fake independence is to disagree with everyone. If people say yes, the wannabe says no. If everyone likes something, he suddenly hates it. If an opinion becomes popular, he immediately searches for a reason to attack it. He thinks being difficult makes him independent. It doesn't. Sometimes disagreeing with everyone is simply another form of needing everyone. A genuinely self-directed man doesn't make decisions based on whether they will separate him from the crowd. He looks at the situation, forms his own judgment, and accepts whatever conclusion makes the most sense to him, even when that conclusion happens to match everyone else's. That requires more confidence than constant rebellion, because saying they're right can be harder for an ego-driven person than saying they're all idiots. The real test of independence isn't how often a man stands against people. It's whether he can think without needing opposition to feel intelligent. He can agree without becoming a follower. He can disagree without becoming a rebel. He doesn't turn every popular opinion into something he must fight just to protect his identity. And that's where the wannabe gets exposed. The wannabe needs to be different. The real man needs to be correct according to his own judgment. Sometimes that puts him alone. Sometimes it puts him directly in the middle of the crowd. He doesn't care which one it is. Number 4, he has no emotional attachment to being hard to read. Being hard to read is not the same thing as being emotionally strong. Some wannabes deliberately make themselves confusing. They give short answers, hide harmless feelings, delay replies, and act unusually cold because they believe mystery automatically creates value. They want people asking what is going on in his head, as if emotional fog were a personality trait. A genuinely self-directed man doesn't need that performance. He can be private without being cryptic. He can keep certain things to himself without turning every conversation into a guessing game. If he's happy, he doesn't panic about showing it. If something hurts him, he doesn't automatically bury it just to maintain a tough image. That's real control, choosing what to reveal instead of being afraid to reveal anything. He doesn't carefully monitor every facial expression because he's terrified someone might discover that he actually cares. He understands that having emotions doesn't make him predictable, and expressing them doesn't make him weak. Sometimes he'll be serious, sometimes he'll joke, sometimes he'll explain exactly what he thinks. Other times he'll say nothing because there's simply nothing worth saying. There is no rigid character to maintain, and that is what makes him difficult to manipulate. You can't control a man by threatening to expose emotions he's not ashamed of having. The wannabe protects his image. The real man protects his inner freedom. Number 5, he can lose an argument without losing his identity. Nothing exposes insecurity faster than a man who treats every disagreement like a battle for survival. The wannabe doesn't listen to understand. He listens for openings. The moment someone challenges his opinion, his goal changes from finding the truth to protecting his pride. Suddenly, admitting one small mistake feels like surrender. A genuinely self-directed man doesn't need that protection. He can sit across from someone who completely disagrees with him and remain calm enough to examine what they're saying. If they make a stronger point, he can admit it. No excuses, no sudden change of subject, no "I knew that already" performance. That's a surprisingly rare kind of strength, because when your identity isn't built around being the smartest person in the room, being corrected isn't humiliating, it's useful. He understands that being wrong about an idea doesn't mean being worthless as a person, so he can say, "You're right, I hadn't considered that," and continue the conversation without feeling smaller. The wannabe needs to win the argument. The real man needs to leave the argument with a better understanding than he had when it started. Sometimes that means defending his position firmly. Sometimes it means changing it completely. Either way, his ego doesn't get the final vote. That's the difference between someone protecting an image of intelligence and someone genuinely committed to becoming wiser. He would rather lose an argument than lose the opportunity to learn from it. Number 6, he doesn't collect enemies to build a personality. Some men need enemies because enemies give them an identity. Every former friend becomes toxic. Every person who criticizes them is jealous. Every successful person they dislike is secretly fake. Before long, their entire personality becomes a courtroom where everyone else is permanently on trial. That isn't strength. It's emotional dependence wearing a tough jacket. A genuinely self-directed man doesn't need a list of enemies to feel significant. He can recognize when someone has behaved badly without turning that person into the main character of his life. He doesn't spend months explaining why he cut someone off, checking what they're doing, or secretly hoping they fail. He simply moves on, and here's the part that separates maturity from performance. He can dislike someone without needing to destroy their reputation. If a relationship ends, he doesn't automatically need an audience to hear his version. If someone disappoints him, he learns from it. If someone repeatedly crosses a boundary, he creates distance. No campaign required. The wannabe keeps talking about the people he supposedly doesn't care about. The real man eventually stops talking about them altogether. That's because his attention is too valuable to spend building a museum of grudges. He doesn't need villains to make himself look like the hero. His life has enough substance without constantly pointing at someone else and saying, "That's the person I defeated." Number 7, he doesn't confuse emotional control with emotional starvation. There is a difference between controlling your emotions and pretending you don't have any. A wannabe Sigma often mistakes numbness for strength. He refuses to show excitement, hides disappointment, avoids affection, and treats vulnerability like a personal failure. The goal isn't actually emotional control. The goal is to look untouchable. But being emotionally unavailable doesn't automatically make someone powerful. A genuinely self-directed man can feel deeply without becoming controlled by what he feels. He can be angry without sending the message he will regret 5 minutes later. He can be hurt without turning pain into revenge. He can care about someone without handing that person complete control over his decisions. That's real emotional discipline. He doesn't need to destroy the emotion. He needs to understand it. Sometimes anger tells him that a boundary has been crossed. Sometimes sadness tells him that something mattered. Sometimes fear points toward something that deserves attention. He doesn't blindly obey these feelings, but he doesn't pretend they don't exist either. And this is where the wannabe gets exposed. The wannabe says, "I don't care." The mature man can say, "I care, but I'm still going to choose what I do next." That sentence represents an entirely different level of strength. Because emotional control isn't becoming a stone. It's remaining fully human while refusing to let temporary emotions become permanent decisions. Number 8, He can walk into a room without scanning for status. A surprisingly insecure man can spend an entire evening calculating where he stands, who has more money, who is more respected, who is getting attention, who is wearing the expensive watch, who seems important, who should he impress, who should he avoid. The wannabe calls this awareness. Sometimes it's simply insecurity wearing sunglasses. A genuinely self-directed man notices these things without becoming obsessed with them. He doesn't walk into a room mentally ranking everyone like he's judging a bizarre human leaderboard. He understands that status can be useful information, but it isn't a measure of his worth. That gives him a strange kind of freedom. He can speak to the cleaner with the same basic respect he gives the CEO. He doesn't become overly submissive around powerful people or unnecessarily arrogant around people he considers less important. His behavior isn't constantly changing according to someone's social position. And that is the subtle test. Watch how a man behaves when there is nothing to gain. Does he suddenly become charming when an important person arrives? Does his personality change when he realizes someone has money or influence? Does he ignore people who can't offer him anything? A genuine Sigma doesn't need every room to confirm his rank. He isn't entering conversations asking, "Where do I stand?" He's asking something far more useful. Is there anything here worth my attention? Once you stop measuring yourself against everyone around you, the room loses its power over you. Number 9, he is willing to be misunderstood without weaponizing it. Being misunderstood isn't automatically proof that you're deep. Sometimes you're misunderstood because you explained yourself badly, behaved poorly, or simply expected people to read your mind. A wannabe Sigma turns misunderstanding into a badge of superiority. He says, "Nobody understands me," and secretly enjoys the distance it creates. It gives him an excuse to remain mysterious, avoid difficult conversations, and convince himself that everyone else is simply too shallow to understand him. A genuinely self-directed man sees it differently. He knows that not everyone will understand his choices, and he's comfortable with that. But when something genuinely matters, he'll explain himself clearly instead of hiding behind silence and calling it depth. That's the difference. Privacy is a choice. Confusion shouldn't be a personality. If someone gets the wrong idea about him, he can correct it without feeling that clarification somehow makes him less mysterious. And if the person still disagrees after hearing him, he can accept that too. He doesn't spend days crafting the perfect explanation for people who have already decided what they want to believe. His peace doesn't depend on universal understanding. But here's what makes this trait powerful. He also doesn't use being misunderstood as an excuse to avoid accountability. If several people keep misunderstanding the same behavior, he is willing to ask himself an uncomfortable question. Could I be contributing to this? That willingness to examine himself is far more impressive than simply claiming nobody can understand him. Number 10, he knows when his independence has become stubbornness. Independence sounds powerful until you realize that some people use it as an excuse to never listen to anyone. The wannabe Sigma treats accepting help like losing. He refuses advice, rejects support, insists on doing everything alone, and becomes strangely proud of making life harder than it needs to be. If someone offers a better solution, he may reject it simply because it didn't come from him. That's not independence, that's ego wearing a work badge. A genuinely self-directed man understands that being capable of doing something alone doesn't mean you should always do it alone. He can ask for advice without surrendering his judgment. He can accept assistance without feeling indebted. He can admit that someone else has more experience in a particular area and actually listen. More importantly, he knows when persistence has stopped being courage and started becoming stupidity. Sometimes the strongest move isn't pushing harder. It's changing the approach. He doesn't cling to a decision simply because he already invested time, money, or pride into it. If the evidence says he's heading in the wrong direction, he can turn around. That takes serious self-awareness. The wannabe is determined to prove, I don't need anybody. The mature man thinks differently. I can stand on my own, but I don't have to be too proud to learn. True independence gives you freedom. Stubbornness quietly takes it away. Number 11. He doesn't mistake being unavailable for being valuable. Some men think becoming difficult to reach automatically makes them important. They take hours to reply on purpose. They ignore calls they could easily answer. They cancel plans at the last minute. They deliberately keep people guessing because they believe scarcity creates respect. Sometimes it creates nothing but annoyance. A genuinely self-directed man understands that having a full life is very different from pretending to be unavailable. If he's busy, he's busy. If he has time, he doesn't feel embarrassed about being available. He doesn't turn basic communication into a psychological chess match just to prove that his attention is expensive. That's because he understands something the wannabe misses. Value comes from substance, not inconvenience. A surgeon isn't valuable because he refuses to answer anyone's message. A trustworthy friend isn't valuable because they make everyone chase them. A skilled person doesn't become more impressive by deliberately becoming harder to access. Real value comes from what you bring when you actually show up. The wannabe wants people thinking, why can't I get his attention? The genuine man is more interested in asking, when I give someone my attention, is it meaningful? That's a completely different mindset. He can protect his time without playing games with it. He can say no without creating suspense. He can respond quickly without feeling that he's somehow lowered his status. His availability isn't a weakness, and his absence isn't a marketing strategy. He doesn't make people chase his attention just to prove that his attention matters. Number 12. He can stop being a Sigma. The deepest sign of genuine independence may be the ability to stop caring about being called a Sigma. That sounds strange, but think about it. If a man becomes obsessed with maintaining the Sigma identity, hasn't he simply replaced one form of social approval with another? Instead of chasing popularity, he's chasing the approval of an internet archetype. The genuine man doesn't need the label to make his choices feel legitimate. He can lead when leadership is necessary. He can cooperate when cooperation gets better results. He can ask for help without feeling smaller. He can be affectionate without suddenly thinking he's lost his edge. He can enjoy company without believing solitude has become less impressive. His behavior isn't controlled by a checklist of what a real Sigma supposedly does. That's the ultimate difference. The wannabe serves the identity. The mature man uses whatever identity is useful and discards it when it becomes restrictive. He doesn't need to prove that he is different from everyone else. He simply makes decisions according to his values, circumstances, and judgment. And if one day he realizes the word Sigma no longer describes him, nothing important has been lost. Because his strength was never inside the label. It was inside his ability to think for himself. The moment you need an identity to prove you're free, that identity has already started controlling you. Real independence means even your idea of independence cannot become your cage. At the end of the day, being a real Sigma isn't about looking mysterious, walking alone, avoiding people, or collecting impressive labels. Those things are easy to imitate. Anyone can play the part for a few minutes. What is much harder to fake is what happens when nobody is watching. Can you be ordinary without feeling insignificant? Can you admit you're wrong without your ego collapsing? Can you disagree without needing to rebel? Can you feel deeply without becoming controlled by your emotions? Can you walk away without needing the other person to notice? Can you accept help without feeling weak? Can you change your mind without feeling defeated? Those are the quieter tests. Because real independence isn't loud. It doesn't constantly announce itself. It doesn't need mysterious captions, dramatic exits, or a carefully constructed personality designed to make people wonder who you are. The strongest sign may actually be this. You don't need to prove that you're different. You simply know what matters to you. You think for yourself, you take responsibility for your choices, and you refuse to let an internet label become your personality. The wannabe is busy performing independence. The real man is busy living it. And perhaps that's the greatest finishing touch of all. When a man becomes genuinely comfortable with who he is, he no longer needs everyone else to recognize it. If this video gave you a new perspective, don't just watch and move on. Subscribe to the channel for more thought-provoking content, and stay with us as we continue exploring the psychology behind strength, independence, self-mastery, and the traits most people overlook.